She stepped off that train with 2 worn bags, a 6-year-old daughter in a wheelchair, and the belief that someone was waiting to build a life with her. He was waiting. He took one look at her child and walked away, right there on the platform, in front of the whole town, loud enough for everyone to hear. They laughed. They whispered. They decided she was finished before she'd even begun. But she didn't beg. She didn't break. She picked up both bags, took her daughter's hand, and walked straight into a town that had already made up its mind about her. What happened next is the part nobody expected. If this story is the kind that stays with you, hit like, drop the name of your city in the comments, and follow along. I want to see how far this one travels. The train had been running 6 hours late out of Denver, and by the time it finally pulled into Silver Creek, the afternoon light had gone flat and mean, the kind of pale Colorado light that showed everything too clearly and forgave nothing. Amelia Rose Carter stood in the aisle while the other passengers pushed past her, not out of rudeness exactly, just out of the ordinary selfishness of people who had somewhere to be. She waited until the car was nearly empty before she moved, then turned back to help Lily, who had slept through most of the last 2 hours with her head against the window and her dark hair pressed flat on one side. "We're here," Amelia said quietly. Lily opened her eyes and looked out at the platform. She was 6 years old, small for her age, with her mother's brown eyes and a stillness to her face that people sometimes mistook for sadness. It wasn't sadness. It was simply the expression of a child who had learned early to take stock of new places before deciding what she thought of them. "Is it far?" Lily asked. "Is what far?" "The ranch." Amelia didn't know. She'd never asked. She had exchanged 8 letters with Nathan Whitmore over the course of 5 months, and in all that correspondence she had learned that he owned 400 acres northeast of town, that he ran cattle, that he had built the main house himself 12 years ago, and that he wanted a wife who could manage a household, and as he'd put it, wasn't afraid of hard work or hard weather. She had not thought to ask how far the ranch was from the station. "Not too far," she told Lily, which was the answer she gave whenever she didn't know. Getting Lily's wheelchair off the train required the help of a porter who seemed put out by the request, but helped anyway, maneuvering the chair down the narrow steps with more noise than necessary. Amelia thanked him, and he walked away without acknowledging it. She got Lily settled, checked that the footrests were properly positioned — Lily always complained when they weren't — and then gathered their 2 bags from the pile of luggage being offloaded onto the platform. The bags were not heavy. She had packed what they could carry and left the rest. That had been the deal she made with herself 3 months ago, standing in the kitchen of the house she could no longer afford to keep after her husband Thomas had died. She would take what they needed and she would not look back. Some deals were easier to make than to keep, but she was keeping it. The platform was busy. Silver Creek was not a large town, but it was a working one, and the afternoon train brought supplies and mail and occasionally new faces, all of which drew a certain number of people who had nothing better to do than watch. Amelia felt them noticing her before she located Nathan Whitmore in the small crowd. She knew him from a photograph he'd sent with his 3rd letter. Tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with a square jaw and the kind of weathered look that came from years outdoors. He was standing near the far end of the platform with his hat in his hands, and he was watching her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read at that distance. She walked toward him. Lily rolled beside her, navigating the uneven platform boards with the practiced ease of a child who had been in her chair long enough to have opinions about surfaces. Nathan Whitmore's expression shifted as they got closer. It happened in stages, the way a door closing happens in stages. The first movement, the narrowing gap, the final click. His eyes went to Lily, then to the wheelchair, then to Amelia's face, then back to the wheelchair. Amelia had seen this sequence before. She knew what it meant. She kept walking. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I'm Amelia Carter. This is my daughter Lily." He didn't speak immediately. Around them, the noise of the platform continued. A dog barking somewhere, 2 men arguing over a crate, a woman calling to someone across the tracks. But the small pocket of space where the 3 of them stood went very quiet. "You never said," Nathan Whitmore said finally. His voice was not loud, but it carried. "I beg your pardon?" "In your letters." He looked at Lily again, something working its way across his face that wasn't pity and wasn't cruelty, but was something Amelia recognized as closer to the latter. "You never said anything about a child like this." "I told you I had a daughter," Amelia said. Her voice was steady. She had worked to make it steady. "I mentioned Lily in my second letter." "A daughter," he repeated. "You said you had a daughter. You didn't say—" He stopped. A few people on the platform had noticed the exchange. A woman in a yellow dress had turned to watch openly. Two men near the depot doors had gone still. "You didn't say she couldn't walk." "Lily uses a wheelchair," Amelia said. "That doesn't— I run a cattle ranch." His voice was getting harder now, settling into something that had made its decision and was done negotiating. 400 acres. Rough terrain, horses, fences, cattle drives. I need a wife who can keep up with that. A family that can keep up with that. He glanced at Lily one more time, and whatever he saw there, or whatever he'd already decided he'd see, closed the door the rest of the way. This isn't going to work. The platform had gone quiet enough that his words carried. The woman in the yellow dress was not even pretending not to listen. One of the men near the depot doors said something under his breath, and the other man laughed, low and mean. Lily hadn't said anything. She was sitting very still in her chair, her hands in her lap, looking at Nathan Whitmore with that same evaluating expression she'd used on the town when the train pulled in. Taking stock. Amelia set down both bags. She did it deliberately, setting them down squarely on the platform boards, as if she intended to be there for a while. "I see," she said. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience," Nathan said. He had put his hat back on. "I'll arrange for your tickets back to Denver. It's the least I can do." "That's very generous." She looked at him steadily. "But I'd like to say something first." He seemed to expect her to plead. She could see it in the way he braced slightly, prepared for tears or argument, or the kind of desperate bargaining that made men uncomfortable. She was not going to give him that. "My daughter," Amelia said, "is not a problem to be managed. She is not a complication I neglected to mention because I was trying to trick you. She is a child, 6 years old. She has opinions about breakfast food, and she knows all the words to 2 songs she learned from her grandmother, and she is, in every way that matters, the best person I have ever had the privilege of knowing." She paused. "Let that settle. You are not rejecting a broken woman with a broken child. You're walking away from someone who would have worked harder for your household than anyone you've ever hired, and a little girl who would have, eventually, probably made your life considerably more interesting than it's been." She picked up both bags. "So, thank you for making this easy." She turned and she walked, pushing one bag against her hip and pulling the other, and Lily rolled beside her without a word. Behind them, she heard Nathan Whitmore say something to someone nearby, some muttered justification that she didn't catch and didn't want to. She heard the woman in the yellow dress laugh, a small, dismissive sound. She heard 2 men talking in the lazy, bored way of people watching something that cost them nothing. She kept walking. She had nowhere to walk to. The town of Silver Creek spread out past the end of the platform, one main street visible from here, a hardware store, what looked like a hotel, a livery. She did not have enough money for the hotel for more than 2 nights. She didn't know a single person in this town. She had 2 bags, $23, and a 6-year-old who had not yet asked a single question about what had just happened. "Mama," Lily said. "Yes." "He's not very smart." Amelia almost laughed. She caught it before it came out because she was afraid if she started, she wouldn't stop, and she needed to think clearly right now. "He made a mistake," she said. "I know," Lily said simply, as if this was a settled matter and they could move on. They came to the end of the platform where a ramp led down to the street, and Amelia stopped there, looking out at the town, trying to think. The afternoon light was still flat and merciless. A wagon was pulling out of the livery down the street. A man was sweeping the porch in front of what might have been a general store. She heard footsteps behind her, someone walking with purpose, not the idle drift of the platform crowd. And she didn't turn around because she was in the middle of trying to calculate whether her $23 could get them back to Denver, and what exactly she would do when they arrived, since the house was gone, and her sister in Cincinnati had made it plainly clear 2 years ago that, "Ma'am," she turned. The man who had spoken was standing about 6 feet away, and he was not Nathan Whitmore, and he was not one of the men who had laughed. He was taller than Whitmore, rangier, with dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face that had been lived in hard. Not beaten, just lived in, the way good leather gets worn to a specific shape over time. He was dressed practically, working clothes, good boots, a hat that had seen real weather. He was looking at her in a way that was different from the way everyone else on that platform had been looking at her. Not with pity, not with entertainment, not with the particular species of discomfort that came from watching someone else's humiliation. He looked like a man who had just watched something happen and drawn a conclusion. "Wyatt Mercer," he said. It wasn't a preamble to an explanation, just his name, offered the way you'd offer a hand. "Amelia Carter," she said. "This is Lily." He glanced at Lily. "I heard what you said to Whitmore. I imagine most of the platform did." "Yeah." He looked back at her. There was a directness to him that she found oddly easier to deal with than the careful expressions of people being polite. "I run the Double M northeast of town, about 8 miles out. I've been running it short-handed since my housekeeper left in March." He paused. "I'm not offering charity. I need someone to manage the house, cooking, organizing, keeping track of supplies, dealing with the men when they forget themselves. It's real work." Amelia looked at him. "What does it pay?" she asked. Something shifted in his face that might have been respect. $20 a month plus room and board for you both," he said. "I've got a bedroom with a proper door you could use, ground floor. Ranch house needs work. I won't lie to you about that." "What kind of work?" "Windows need recalking. Kitchen floor needs 2 boards replaced. Back porch is a hazard." He seemed to think this was ordinary information she was owed. "Place hasn't had anyone paying attention to it for a while." "I'm not a servant," she said. "I didn't say you were." "I'll take care of your house and help manage the domestic logistics of your operation," she said. "But I won't be spoken to the way I was just spoken to on this platform. And I won't have my daughter spoken to that way either." "I heard how you handled being spoken to," Wyatt said. "I didn't see a woman who needed me to warn people to be careful." Amelia looked at him for a long moment. He held her gaze without difficulty, not aggressively, just steadily, the way a man looks when he's not performing anything. "I'll need a few weeks to decide if it's working," she said. "That goes both ways," he said. Lily, who had been quiet through all of this, spoke up. "Do you have animals?" Wyatt looked at her. "Some. Horses, cattle, a dog that's more trouble than she's worth." "What's the dog's name?" He thought about it. "I call her Reckless. She comes to it sometimes." Lily seemed to weigh this information seriously. "Okay," she said. Amelia picked up her bags. "Let's see the ranch then." What? The wagon ride out to the Double M took 40 minutes over a road that was mostly good, with one bad stretch through a dry creek bed where Wyatt slowed to nearly a stop and still managed to jar them thoroughly. He drove without much conversation, which Amelia appreciated. She was still sorting through the events of the last hour, filing them away into the categories she'd developed over the past year of managing difficult circumstances. Things to feel later, things to act on now, and things that were simply done. Nathan Whitmore went into the first category. She would feel the humiliation of it later, in private, when Lily was asleep and she had a few minutes to herself. For now it was filed and set aside. The country out this way was open and severe in the particular way of high plains. The land didn't soften into distance. It just kept going, interrupted by the occasional stand of cottonwoods following some invisible water source and the distant dark edge of the mountains to the west. The sky was enormous. She'd known Colorado had big sky, but she hadn't understood it until now, sitting on the wagon seat with the late afternoon opening up in every direction. Lily sat between them and looked at everything. "Those mountains?" she asked, pointing west. "The Sawatch Range," Wyatt said. "Some of those peaks go over 14,000 feet. That's very tall." "It is." "Have you been up them?" "Once, years ago." "Was it cold?" "Very." Lily absorbed this. "I'd like to go up a mountain someday." Wyatt didn't say anything for a moment. Amelia braced slightly, waiting. "There are some you can get to by wagon," he said. "Lower ones. Good views." Amelia let out a breath she hadn't quite realized she was holding. The ranch appeared gradually. First the fence line, then the dark shape of a barn, then the main house coming into focus as they turned off the road onto a rutted drive. The house was larger than she'd expected. 2 stories, wood-sided, painted a gray that might once have been white, with a covered porch that wrapped around the front and south side. It had good bones. She could see that from the wagon. She could also see that Wyatt hadn't been lying about its condition. One of the front porch posts had been crudely repaired with a piece of lumber that didn't match. 2 of the front-facing windows had cloths tacked over them where glass should have been. The yard was... She searched for a kind word and settled on functional, practical. No attempt at anything decorative, just the space that was needed, and no attention beyond that. A man came out of the barn as they pulled in, young, maybe 20, with straw in his hair and the expression of someone perpetually caught between trying to look competent and knowing he wasn't quite there yet. "That's Denny," Wyatt said. "He works the barn mostly. There are 4 other hands, but they're out on the north pasture today." Denny helped with the horses and nodded at Amelia with the particular awkwardness of a young man who hadn't been around women much and wasn't sure of the protocol. He looked at Lily's wheelchair with that same sequence Amelia had seen at the station. The double take, the recalibration. But he didn't say anything. "There's ramps," Wyatt said to Amelia quietly as they got down from the wagon. "Barn has one, and I can put one on the back porch. Back porch needs work anyway." "You already thought about this," she said. "I was thinking on the ride out," he said. He helped get Lily down from the wagon, which required a brief negotiation about the best way to manage it. Lily had opinions, as she always did, about how to get in and out of her chair and who was allowed to help with what. Wyatt listened to her instructions with the focused attention of a man receiving practical information, which was exactly what it was. The inside of the house was better than the outside suggested, and worse than it could have been. The front room was large, with a good stone fireplace that drew well, judging by the clean chimney. The kitchen was functional. Solid stove, plenty of counter space, a long table that could seat 8. The floors were original wood, worn but solid, except for the 2 boards she'd been told about in the kitchen, which she made a note of as they walked through. The bedroom Wyatt showed her was on the ground floor at the back, with its own door to a side porch and a window that faced east. A single iron frame bed and a dresser. Clean, recently cleaned, she thought, which meant he'd prepared for the possibility that she'd come. "There's a room above that could be made into a second bedroom," he said, standing in the doorway, "for when Lily wants her own space." "She won't want her own space for a while, Amelia said. "She doesn't like to sleep alone." He nodded. No explanation required. That first night, after Lily was asleep curled against her side and the ranch had gone quiet except for the distant sound of cattle and one of the hands playing a harmonica badly out by the bunkhouse, Amelia lay awake going over the math of the situation. $20 a month, plus room and board. If she was careful, and she was always careful, she could save enough in 4 months to have options. Denver or further west, somewhere that wasn't here, somewhere she hadn't arrived humiliated in front of a crowd. Somewhere no one knew what had happened at the Silver Creek station. She was going to leave. That was still the plan. She told herself this several times, listening to Lily breathe in the darkness, and then she fell asleep. She was up before anyone else. That wasn't something she'd planned. It was simply what her body did when it was anxious, which was most of the time lately. She dressed in the dark, found the kitchen by memory, and spent a few minutes figuring out the stove, which had its own particular logic. By the time the sky outside the kitchen window had gone from black to gray, she had coffee on and was working through the state of the pantry with the focused energy of a woman who had something to prove to herself if nobody else. The pantry was not a disaster. Whoever had been managing the kitchen before she arrived had maintained staples: flour, salt, lard, cornmeal, dried beans. But there was a randomness to it, a bachelor's collection of necessities without system or planning. She started reorganizing quietly because Lily was still asleep and she didn't want to wake the house. She heard Wyatt before she saw him. His boots on the floorboards had a particular sound, heavier on the left than the right, which she'd noticed on the walk through the house the night before. Old injury, probably. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, and looked at what she'd done to the pantry in an hour and a half. "Coffee's on," she said. He came in, poured a cup, and stood there. "You don't have to start today." "I was awake," she said, "and the pantry was bothering me." He drank his coffee. She kept sorting through tins, checking dates where dates existed and making educated guesses where they didn't. The kitchen was quiet in a way that wasn't uncomfortable. "What do your hands eat for breakfast?" she asked. "Whatever Denny puts together, usually something unfortunate." "Tell them to come in at 7, she said. He looked at her. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He went out. She heard him cross the yard to the bunkhouse, heard voices, and went back to the pantry. At 7, 4 men filed into the kitchen. Denny plus 3 older hands, weathered and quiet, who took their hats off at the door without being asked and arranged themselves around the long table with the automatic politeness of men who'd grown up in households where behavior at the table was not optional. She fed them eggs and salt pork and cornbread and the good coffee, and none of them said much, but they ate everything. One of the older hands, a broad man in his 50s named Cal, who had a scar along his jaw and the careful manner of someone who had been in enough situations to know that careful was usually better, told her the cornbread was the best he'd had in 2 years. "My grandmother's recipe," she said. "Your grandmother knew what she was doing." Lily appeared in the doorway while the men were still at the table, still in her nightgown, her hair loose, squinting against the morning light. She looked at the assembled ranch hands with the expression of someone taking inventory. "There's a dog outside," she said, "under the porch." "That's reckless," Denny said. "She doesn't like mornings." "I don't like mornings either," Lily said. "We have that in common." Denny grinned. Cal made a sound that might have been a laugh. One of the other men, younger than Cal, older than Denny, with a reddish beard and the name Holt, she'd learn later, looked at his plate and appeared to be suppressing something. Amelia set a plate at the end of the table and nodded toward the chair. Lily came in and settled into position. She could manage this chair, which was lower than some she'd encountered, and ate her breakfast while 4 grown men rearranged themselves slightly to make room for her at a table that had more than enough room already. It was a small thing. She noticed it anyway. But the town of Silver Creek was 5 miles back down the main road, and Amelia had been at the Double M for 3 days before she went in for the first time. She went alone, leaving Lily with Denny, who had demonstrated an unlikely talent for patient conversation with a 6-year-old and seemed to genuinely not mind the company. Wyatt lent her the small wagon and one of the steadier horses, a bay named Careful with the mellow temperament of a horse that had been ridden by beginners often enough to have given up being surprised. She needed a list of things for the house: caulking, the materials for the porch boards, a few kitchen items, practical things. She went to the hardware store first, priced the materials, started a running total in her head. She was aware that people recognized her. This was not surprising. The train platform incident had been public, and towns like Silver Creek were attentive to new faces for ordinary reasons, and she had been a new face attached to a scene that people would be talking about for weeks. The hardware store owner was polite but brief, the way people were polite to strangers they weren't sure about yet. She bought what she needed and loaded it in the wagon without incident. It was at the general store that she ran into the woman in the yellow dress. The dress was different today, a blue calico, but she recognized the face. The woman was perhaps 40, pretty in a pointed way, with the manner of someone who had established a position in a community and was accustomed to maintaining it. "You're the woman from the train," the woman said. Not quite a question. "Amelia Carter," Amelia said. "Margaret Avery." The woman looked at her with open assessment. "I heard you went out to Wyatt Mercer's place." "I'm managing his household," Amelia said, "while I get settled." "While you get settled," Margaret repeated as if she were tasting the phrase. "I see. Well, I'm sure Wyatt appreciates the help. That house has been a wreck since—" She paused, adjusted. "For a while now." "It's in good shape structurally," Amelia said. "Just needs attention." "I'm sure." Margaret looked at her for a moment with an expression that was too transparent to be subtle. "You know, people thought it was something, what you said to Nathan on that platform. It was brave, I suppose." "It was what needed saying." "Yes, well, Margaret seemed to make a decision. You should come to the women's circle on Thursday evenings. We meet at the Methodist church. She paused. Bring your daughter if you like. Amelia took note of the phrasing. If you like. Not please bring her or we'd love to meet her, the conditional that left space for the other outcome. I'll think about it, she said. She told Wyatt about it that evening, not because she needed his opinion, but because she'd developed the habit over 3 days of reporting the day's information over the end-of-day coffee that had become an unofficial accounting of ranch business. He sat across the kitchen table with the account book open in front of him, not exactly reading it, and she sat across with her own coffee and gave him the summary of town. Margaret Avery, he said when she mentioned the name. You know her. Everybody knows Margaret. She keeps track of things. What kind of things? He looked at her directly. Who's in? Who's out? Social things. Amelia thought about this. And what am I? Right now? He closed the account book. You're new. She's taking your measure. And if she decides I don't measure up? He considered the question with the seriousness she'd already noticed he gave to most questions. Silver Creek's not a large place, he said finally. Her opinion matters more than it should, but... He stopped. But? People around here also notice work, he said. Real work. What you've done in 3 days with this house, Cal commented on it this morning. He doesn't comment on things. He said the cornbread was good. Cal doesn't say things he doesn't mean. She nodded slowly. It wasn't reassurance exactly. It was information, which was more useful. Outside, the mountains had gone dark against the last of the light. Inside the kitchen, the good stove she'd figured out on the first morning was ticking as it cooled, and through the window she could see one lamp moving across the yard toward the bunkhouse. Holt, probably, finishing some last task. This place, she thought, this complicated, broken down, not what she'd planned place. She'd been telling herself for 3 days that she was going to leave. She kept saying it. She wasn't entirely sure she believed it anymore. The Thursday Women's Circle met in the back room of the Methodist Church, which was a clapboard building on the east side of Main Street with a bell that worked and windows that didn't quite seal against the wind. Amelia had decided to go, not because she particularly wanted to, and not because Margaret Avery's conditional invitation had warmed her toward the idea, but because she was practical enough to know that in a town this size, isolation was its own kind of problem. She left Lily at the ranch with Denny again. Lily had accepted this arrangement with the equanimity she brought to most things, stipulating only that Denny was required to let her name the new calf that had appeared in the south pasture that morning. Denny, who had no strong opinions about calf names, agreed. The back room had 8 women in it when Amelia arrived, arranged on chairs that had been pulled into a rough circle, most of them with needlework in their laps. The conversations that had been running when she opened the door dropped to a different register. Not silence exactly, just that particular recalibration that happened when a new element entered a familiar space. Margaret Avery was there, in a green dress this time, sitting in a chair that was not technically the best chair in the room, but was positioned in a way that made it function as the best chair. She introduced Amelia to the circle with a pleasant efficiency that told people who Amelia was and where she was staying without revealing what Margaret actually thought about either of those facts. The other women were a range of Silver Creek, a doctor's wife named Helen, who was quiet but not unfriendly, a woman named Ruth, who ran the laundry and had the forearms to prove it, 2 younger women who were sisters and finished each other's sentences, a widow named Dot, whose husband had died of a snakebite 2 summers ago, and who had since acquired a directness that came from having survived the worst thing and finding it survivable. They sewed. They talked. The conversation moved through the town's ordinary business, whose fence needed repair, who was expecting, what the railroad company was rumored to be planning about the northern spur, whether the grain prices were going to hold through the fall. Amelia stitched a tear in one of Lily's dresses she'd brought to work on and listened more than she spoke. It was Dot who asked, eventually, what Amelia had known someone would ask. "So Wyatt hired you on," she said. Not unkindly, just straightforwardly, the way Dot apparently did most things. "How's that going?" "Well," Amelia said, "the house needed organizing. It's coming along." "He's a quiet man," Dot said. "Hard to know what he's thinking." "He's direct," Amelia said. I don't have trouble knowing what he's thinking. He says it. One of the sisters, Clara, the younger one, looked up from her needlework. Is it true your daughter is that she uses a wheelchair? Yes, Amelia said. The room had the particular quality of people waiting to see how this was handled. That must be difficult, Clara said. She seemed to genuinely mean it, which was different from the way the same words had been said to Amelia before by people who meant something else entirely. Lily doesn't find it difficult, Amelia said. She finds certain surfaces difficult. And people who talk about her like she isn't in the room, but mostly she just gets on with things. Smart girl, Dot said. Extremely, Amelia agreed. Margaret, who had been stitching through this exchange without appearing to listen, spoke up without looking up from her work. I heard Nathan Whitmore had some things to say this week about you being out at the Double M. The room got a different quality of quiet. I haven't heard them, Amelia said. He's been saying, Margaret paused, which was a choice, not a hesitation, that you misrepresented yourself to him. In your letters. Amelia kept her needle moving. I told him I had a daughter. I mentioned her in my second letter. He's saying you deceived him about her condition. I didn't know her condition was the sort of thing a man needed to be warned about in advance, Amelia said, the way you'd warn someone about a damaged piece of merchandise. The doctor's wife, Helen, made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. Margaret looked up from her needlework now, and her expression was more complex than the pleasant blankness she'd maintained since Amelia walked in. There was something evaluating in it, something that was genuinely trying to sort her out. You're going to have trouble with him, Margaret said. Nathan doesn't like to be shown up, especially not publicly. I didn't show him up, Amelia said. He showed himself up. I just declined to pretend otherwise. The silence lasted a beat longer than before, and then Dot laughed outright, which seemed to give the room permission to breathe again. Ruth said something to the sisters about the stitching pattern they were working on, and the conversation shifted and the evening continued. Walking back to the wagon afterward, in the full dark of a Colorado night, with the stars unnecessarily abundant overhead, Amelia allowed herself to feel the shape of what she was navigating. Nathan Whitmore was already working against her in town. The women's circle was undecided, some willing, some waiting, one or two already positioned against her by association with Nathan's narrative. Wyatt's reputation was protection of a kind, but it was limited protection because it depended on her being seen as clearly in his employ and clearly respectable in how she conducted herself there, which would be subject to interpretation by people who hadn't made up their minds about her yet. It was a lot of variables for $23 a month. $20, she corrected herself. She'd made 20 in her head when she was trying to feel better about the situation. It was 20. She drove back to the Double M in the dark, with Careful's ears moving steadily against the starlit sky, and she thought about what the next several weeks needed to look like. October came on faster than she'd expected, and with it the first real cold. Not the sharp, clean cold of winter proper, but the preliminary cold that came down off the mountains in the mornings and hadn't quite made up its mind to leave by midday. The ranch adjusted to the season the way ranches did, which was to say without much acknowledgement and with a lot more work. Wyatt and the hands were out earlier and later, checking fence lines before the hard freezes came, making sure the cattle were in good grazing rotation, dealing with the particular catalog of problems that came with preparing animals and structures for winter in high country. Amelia had fixed the 2 kitchen floorboards by the end of her first week. She'd watched Holt do enough minor carpentry to understand the basic principle, and she'd simply done it, which had produced in Holt a look of modified bafflement that she'd privately found satisfying. The porch boards were a bigger job. She and Wyatt tackled them together on a Sunday when the hands were off, and Lily sat on the repaired section of porch with Reckless the dog and offered periodic commentary on their progress. That board's not even, Lily observed. Wyatt looked at it. It's not the worst thing. The one you just took out was worse, Amelia said, sitting back on her heels and pushing her hair out of her face with the back of her hand. What do you have against level surfaces? I didn't build the porch. Who did? Previous owner. He held the new board in place, eyeing it. Man who built this house originally did the main structure and did it right. Everything that was added on after, porch, the lean-to on the barn, that was less considered. That describes most of the outbuildings too, she said. I know it. They worked for another hour, and the porch got considerably more level, if not perfectly so. And Lily fell asleep in her chair with one hand resting on Reckless's back, and when Amelia looked over and saw it, she had to make herself look away quickly and focus on the board she was nailing because the sight of her daughter asleep in the afternoon sun on a repaired porch with a ridiculous dog was exactly the kind of thing she couldn't let herself feel too much about right now. She was still going to leave. That was still the plan. She drove the last nail a little harder than necessary. The thing about Nathan Whitmore was that he was not a stupid man. Amelia had made the error of hoping he was, because stupid men were easier to dismiss, but the reports that filtered back to the Double M over the following weeks made it clear that he was strategic in his dislike and patient in his execution of it. He didn't come to the ranch. He didn't confront her directly in town. What he did was work the social channels with the kind of methodical attention that only men who felt entitled to control outcomes could sustain. He told people she'd misled him. He told people Wyatt was making a mistake he'd regret. He said the words liability and charity case in enough different conversations that they started to develop their own momentum. He had money, which meant he had leverage over certain people, and he used it carefully enough that the people being leveraged didn't always notice they were being leveraged. Cal told her some of this. Cal, it turned out, was the kind of man who tracked the town's social weather with the same attention he gave to actual weather, practically, without much emotion, as useful information to have. Whitmore's been talking to the grain supplier, Cal said one morning over coffee, not making a production of it, just mentioning a fact. Hinting that the Double M's situation has changed, that maybe extending credit's a bigger risk than it was. Has he succeeded? Amelia asked. Not yet. Harlan over at the grain store's been dealing with Wyatt for 11 years, but Whitmore's patient. Amelia thought about this. Does Wyatt know? Wyatt knows most things about what happens in this town, Cal said. He doesn't always say. She found Wyatt that evening in the barn, doing an inventory of the winter feed stores with a lantern and a notebook. He wrote in a small, precise hand that surprised her the first time she saw it. She'd expected something rougher. Cal told me about Whitmore and the grain supplier, she said. He kept writing. I figured he would. Why didn't you tell me? He looked up from the notebook. Would it have changed what you're doing? No, she said. Then I didn't see the point in loading you with it. He said it without apology, not as a justification, just as a statement of his reasoning. You've got enough to track. She thought about arguing that she had a right to know the things that affected her situation, and she was preparing the argument when she realized that was actually her point, and she'd already made it by coming to the barn. He hadn't withheld it from her. Cal had just told her first. What are you going to do about it? She asked instead. About Whitmore. He capped his pen. Same thing I always do when someone wants to make a problem for me. What's that? Run a better ranch than they can cause damage to. He picked up the lantern. Harlan's not going to change his terms with us over Whitmore's hints. He's been in this town too long to pick the wrong horse. He paused. Whitmore's scared. Why? Because you made him look small in front of his neighbors, and he can't undo it. He said it simply, not with satisfaction, just with assessment. Men like him, they can handle losing. They can't handle looking like they lost. She stood in the barn doorway while he moved deeper into the space to check on something in the far stall, and she thought about what he'd said and about the way he'd said it, with the calm of someone who had been dealing with difficult men for a long time and had stopped being surprised by their methods. Has he done this to you before? She asked. Whitmore. Wyatt's answer was a moment in coming. He made a run at the water rights on the eastern property line 3 years ago. Said there was a surveying error in the original deed. Had a lawyer come out from Denver. What happened? I had a better lawyer. He didn't say it like a victory, just a fact. I knew it would come to that when I bought the land. Some men you just have to outlast. Well, it was Holt, surprisingly, who first gave Lily a real task. Holt was not the ranch hand she would have predicted it from. He was the quietest of the four. Not in the watchful, deliberate way Cal was quiet, but in the private way of a man who kept the majority of himself in reserve and only offered the surface version to most people. He'd come west from somewhere in the Appalachians 7 or 8 years ago, by Amelia's rough calculation from the few details she'd gathered, and he had the particular self-sufficiency of a man who'd been getting along on his own long enough that other people's company was pleasant but not necessary. He had taken to Lily the way some adults took to her, not with the theatrical sympathy that made Lily go rigid with discomfort, and not with the pointed avoidance that was its own kind of insult, but with a workmanlike acknowledgement that she was a person who was present and had things to say. It started because Lily found him. She had developed, in the 3 weeks since arriving at the Double M, a navigational understanding of the ranch that impressed Amelia and occasionally gave her cause for concern. Lily had mapped the accessible routes, the packed dirt paths between the main house and barn, the cleared track to the south pasture gate, the level ground near the bunkhouse where the morning sun hit early, and she moved through them with the confidence of someone who had long since decided that the geography of any given place was simply a problem to be solved. She found Holt in the afternoon behind the barn, repairing a section of fence with the focused attention of a man who had decided this fence was going to be done right and was not going to be rushed about it. Amelia only knew about this because she'd come looking for Lily and found them there. Lily in her chair at the corner of the barn, and Holt 3 feet away with wire and pliers, talking. Just talking. The easy back and forth of 2 people in the middle of a subject. She stopped before they saw her. "But how do you know which ones are going to get through the winter?" Lily was asking. "You look at them," Holt said. "The way they're carrying weight, how they're moving. A cow that's thin going into October is going to have a hard time when January hits." "Then what do you do?" "Separate them out. Make sure they're getting better feed than the others." He paused, working the wire. "Sometimes you do everything right, and they still don't make it. That's cattle." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Is that sad?" Holt thought about it. "Used to bother me more than it does," he said. "Now I just try to do everything right and not take it personally." "Mama says that," Lily said. "Not about cows, about other things." "Your mama's probably right." Amelia backed away quietly before either of them noticed her. The task came a week later. Holt had rigged a low writing table near the barn door, a board across 2 feed barrels, the right height for someone in a wheelchair, and set Lily up with the tally sheets for the daily cattle count. It was simple work. The hands called numbers as they came in from the pasture, and Lily marked them down. She had her mother's handwriting, small and precise, and she was meticulous about it in the way of children who know they have been given real responsibility and are not going to squander it. Amelia found out about this from Cal, who mentioned it as a matter of ranch record. "Lily's tallying the cattle count for Holt," he said. "I know," she said, although she hadn't, not officially. "She's accurate," Cal said. "Better than Denny, if I'm being straight about it." Denny, overhearing, said, That's fair," without resentment. She had not expected to learn to ride. Wyatt hadn't suggested it. She hadn't asked. It happened the way a lot of things at the Double M happened, which was gradually and without formal announcement. The horse was a gray mare named Still, which was not a name anyone at the ranch took credit for, and which the horse ignored entirely. She was 14 years old, the oldest horse on the property, and she had arrived at the Double M with the previous foreman who'd left 3 years ago and simply stayed, possibly through inertia or possibly because she'd decided the pasture was acceptable. Amelia had been taking feed to the horses in the morning. It was on her route, the barn was on the way to the well, and Denny was often slow in the mornings, and Still had developed a habit of meeting her at the stall door with the expectant expression of a horse who had opinions about morning schedules. One morning Wyatt was in the barn when she came through, and he watched her give Still her feed, and he said, without preamble, "You ever ridden?" "Not in 10 years," she said. "Still's the one to start on," he said. "She's not going to do anything unexpected." "I didn't say I wanted to start." "No," he agreed. She looked at the mare, who looked back at her with an ancient brown eye. "After the afternoon chores," she said. He taught her in the small corral behind the barn with the matter-of-fact patience of a man who taught things practically rather than theoretically. He showed her once, explained the important points without over-explaining, and then stepped back and let her make the mistakes she was going to make. There were some mistakes. Still endured them with the resignation of a very old, very patient animal. "Your hands are too tight," Wyatt said from his position leaning on the fence rail. "I know," she said through her teeth. "She knows you're nervous." "I know that too." "She's not going to react to it, but she knows." Amelia made herself loosen her grip, which went against every instinct she had, and still took a single smooth step and stopped, as if to demonstrate that this was all that had ever been required. "There," Wyatt said. "Don't say there at me." "Sorry." He didn't sound particularly sorry. She found unexpectedly that she didn't mind. They went around the corral 3 more times, and by the 3rd time her hands had found something closer to the right tension, present but not clenched, and Still's ears had relaxed from their slightly concerned position to something more neutral. When she dismounted, she was aware that her legs were going to have opinions about this in the morning. She gave Still's neck an awkward pat, and the horse accepted it graciously. "Same time tomorrow?" Wyatt asked. She was going to say something about how she hadn't decided yet, about how she was still planning to leave in another month, and learning to ride was not exactly a priority for a woman who was going back to Denver. She had the sentence half formed. "Same time tomorrow," she said. It was Lily who named the calf, after a week of deliberation, Biscuit. The name was met with a range of reactions from the ranch hands. Denny said it was a good name. Cal said nothing, which Amelia had learned meant he didn't object. Holt looked at the calf, then at Lily, and said it suited it. The calf appeared to have no opinion on the matter. Wyatt, when informed, said "Biscuit" once, as if testing whether it got better on repetition. "Don't look at me," Amelia said. She deliberated for a week. What were the other options? Henry, Captain, and, for about 2 days, Invisible. He looked at her. "She went through a phase," Amelia said. He looked away, but she saw the corner of his mouth move before it stopped. She filed that away with the other small things she'd been collecting without meaning to. The way he listened when Lily explained something at length, with the same focused attention he gave to useful information. The way he had quietly cleared a smoother path from the side porch to the barn after the first hard rain. The way he'd come in one evening to find Lily asleep over a book at the kitchen table and had simply moved to the chair across the room and sat there reading by the lamp until Amelia came in and could take over. He hadn't said anything about it. She hadn't asked him to. She was still going to leave. She had told herself this fact fewer times this week than last week, and the time she told herself it had a different quality. Less like a plan, more like a thing she was reminding herself of because she was concerned she might forget. Outside, the October dark had settled on the ranch, and the mountains were invisible against it, their presence implied by the absence of stars in the western sky. Inside the kitchen, the lamp made everything amber and close, and she could hear Lily in the back bedroom talking to Reckless, who had been banned from sleeping inside, but had discovered that Lily would leave the window ajar if asked politely enough. She sat at the kitchen table with the household accounts she'd been keeping, a habit she'd started in the 2nd week, a simple ledger of what was spent and what was coming in and what was going out, because that was how she knew whether things were working. And she added up the month's column, and the column was fine, better than fine. The ranch was running well, the house was warmer, cleaner, better organized. The men ate better, and she thought, worked better for it. Though she was careful not to say this because it would sound like she was taking credit for their work. The pantry was stocked for winter. The porch was level. $20 a month. But she was also, she acknowledged, looking at the ledger, learning things she hadn't known before. She was learning to ride. She was learning how a ranch operated from the inside. She was learning the particular language of men who worked land, the way they talked around things, and the way, sometimes, they didn't talk at all. She was learning what Wyatt Mercer's voice sounded like when something surprised him, which was different from all his other voices. She told herself once more that she was going to leave. The lamp flickered. From the back bedroom, Lily said something that made Reckless sneeze. Amelia closed the ledger and went to make tea. The tea had become a fixture she hadn't planned for. Every evening after Lily was settled, Amelia sat at the kitchen table with the ledger or a piece of mending, or sometimes nothing at all. And most evenings Wyatt came in from whatever the last task of the day had been and poured himself coffee from the pot she kept warm on the back of the stove, and they sat across from each other and talked or didn't talk in roughly equal measure. It had started as a practical arrangement, the end-of-day accounting she'd described to herself in professional terms, and it had continued past the point where that explanation was fully convincing. She noticed this without making a decision about it. That seemed to be her pattern lately, noticing things, filing them in the category of things to feel later, and continuing. November came in gray and serious. The first snow arrived on a Tuesday, not a blizzard, but a meaningful snow, 4 inches overnight that changed the sound of the ranch in the morning. Muffled and close, the way snow always made things sound, as if the world had moved indoors. The hands took the change in stride. Amelia pulled Lily's heavier coat from the bottom of the bag where she'd packed it in Denver, already knowing they'd need it, and felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was close to it. She had packed for this winter. She had planned for it. Whatever happened after, she had at least done that right. What she had not planned for, what she was still trying to understand the shape of, was Nathan Whitmore's patience, because the rumors and the supplier pressure were not, it turned out, his actual plan. They were, in the vocabulary of a man like Whitmore, preamble. Cal brought her the real news on a Wednesday morning 2 weeks into November, and he brought it in the way Cal brought difficult information, which was directly and without decoration. Whitmore filed a challenge on the water rights to the Eastern Creek, he said. She set down her coffee cup. Wyatt said he'd tried this before. He did. Wyatt beat it with a lawyer from Denver. Cal turned his hat in his hands, which was the only sign he ever gave of being troubled by something. This time, Whitmore's got documentation. Something about the original land survey. He's claiming there was an error that gave Wyatt access to water that should run through Whitmore's eastern parcel. Is the claim valid? Harlan's son-in-law did a survey last spring, Cal said. I don't know who paid for it, but someone did. Amelia thought about the Eastern Creek. She had ridden past it twice in her morning lessons with Wyatt. A modest creek, nothing dramatic, running along the bottom of a shallow cut in the land. But she had seen enough of ranch operation by now to understand what water meant in this country. Not convenience, not comfort, survival through a dry summer. The difference between a herd that made it to fall and one that didn't. Does Wyatt know? She asked. I'm telling you both at once, Cal said, and she realized Wyatt had come in from the porch and was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had heard enough. She could tell by the particular stillness that came over him when something required his full attention. Not surprise exactly, more like the conscious setting aside of everything that wasn't the problem. When did he file? Wyatt asked. Papers were delivered to the county clerk Monday, Cal said. I heard from Harlan yesterday. Not from the clerk's office. No. Wyatt moved into the kitchen and poured his coffee with the deliberate care of a man managing something. He paid someone at the clerk's office to hold the notification, he said. Not a question. That'd be my guess, Cal said. The three of them were quiet for a moment, with the snow outside the window and the stove ticking and the weight of what Whitmore had done sitting in the kitchen between them like something solid. I'll need to go to Denver, Wyatt said, to get Henderson. Henderson was the lawyer. Amelia had never met him, but she'd heard the name several times, a careful, expensive man who knew land law. How long? She asked. 3 days minimum, maybe 5. He looked at her. I wouldn't ask you to. The ranch will be fine, she said. Cal's here. The men know their work. It's not the ranch I was worried about. She held his gaze for a moment. We'll be fine, she said, with enough steadiness that she believed it herself. He left the next morning before dawn. The 4 days that Wyatt was gone taught Amelia things about herself that she hadn't needed to know before. She had believed in some orderly part of her mind that the ranch would simply continue in his absence the way a well-organized machine continued when the primary operator stepped away. The machine would run. The levers would do what levers did. She would manage the house, Cal would manage the men, and Wyatt would come back to find things largely as he'd left them. What she hadn't accounted for was the 1,000 small decisions that didn't belong to any single person. The judgment calls that came up between the organized parts, in the spaces where the machine's design hadn't anticipated the specific situation. On the first day, one of the cattle broke through the fence on the north pasture and 12 others followed it into a rocky draw that was both difficult to access and hard to move cattle out of. This required 4 hours of cold, bad-tempered work from Holt and Cal and Denny, and eventually Amelia herself, who discovered that she could be useful in ways that didn't require horsemanship if she was willing to stand in the right place and wave her arms at the right moment. She was willing. On the second day, a man arrived from town claiming that Whitmore's lawyer had sent him to survey the Eastern Creek line and that he had a legal right to access the property. Amelia met him at the gate. "Mr. Wyatt Mercer isn't on the property," she said. "I'm not authorizing access to the land in his absence." The man, a clerk type, young, with cold hands, and the general manner of someone doing a job he hadn't fully thought through, said that the survey order was signed by the county clerk and superseded her authorization. "Then you'll need the county clerk to come out here personally and tell me that," Amelia said. "Or you can come back when Mr. Mercer is here. Either of those things works for me." He left. She wasn't sure if she'd handled it correctly, legally, and she spent part of the second night at the kitchen table writing down everything that had happened in exact sequence so Wyatt would have a complete account. On the third day, Lily spiked a fever. It came on in the afternoon, that particular speed that children's fevers had, going from fine to alarming in the time it took Amelia to walk from the kitchen to the back bedroom and back. She got Lily into bed, got the extra blanket, made the broth she'd made a dozen times before, and sat beside the bed with a wet cloth and the controlled, focused attention that mothers developed when their children were sick, which was less like calm and more like fear with somewhere to put itself. Holt, who came in for the evening meal and found the kitchen empty and Amelia absent, knocked on the bedroom door. "What do you need?" he asked. "She'll be all right," Amelia said. "It's not serious." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. Holt's face in the doorway was exactly what it always was. Private, practical, not performing concern, just present. "There's stew on the stove," she said. "Tell the men to eat. And if you wouldn't mind checking that the south barn door is latched before you turn in. The wind's been getting under it." "Already done," he said. "Denny's got the stew." He paused. "I'll sit outside if you need anything." "You don't have to do that. I'll sit outside," he said again. And he did, on the chair she kept near the side porch door, and she could see the amber tip of his cigarette through the window for the better part of 2 hours until Lily's fever broke and she fell into proper sleep. Amelia went to the porch door and opened it. "She's sleeping," she said. Holt nodded. He ground out the cigarette and stood. "Thank you," she said. He put on his hat. "Ranch is running fine, Mrs. Carter," he said, which was not a response to her thanks, but was, she understood, exactly the thing he'd wanted her to know. Wyatt came back on the 5th day in the late afternoon, when the light was already thinning out toward the early dark that November insisted on. She heard the wagon on the drive and went to the porch, and she was aware that she was standing there watching for him in a way she hadn't planned on and couldn't entirely account for. He looked tired, the kind of tired that wasn't physical exactly, though it was that too. The tired that came from spending days in lawyers' offices dealing with the legal machinery of a man trying to take something from you. He came in, and she had coffee for him, and she gave him her account of the 4 days, the cattle and the draw, the surveyor at the gate, Lily's fever and the recovery, in the same orderly way she always gave him information. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The surveyor. I told him to come back with the county clerk or wait for you." "That was right," he said. "Henderson says—" He stopped, drank his coffee. "It's going to take time. The documents Whitmore has are real, but Henderson thinks they were selectively gathered. There's evidence on the other side that Whitmore's lawyer is going to try to keep out. Can Henderson get it in?" "He thinks so, but it's going to be 6 months at minimum before there's a hearing." He set down the cup. "In the meantime, we can still access the creek, but if I do anything that could be characterized as improving or developing the water access, Whitmore's lawyer will use it against us." "So you do nothing and wait." "So I do nothing and wait," he agreed. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite bitterness, but was adjacent to it. The voice of a man who knew how to be patient and disliked that patience was required. "He wants to exhaust you," she said. "Yes." "He doesn't understand what you're like," she said. He looked at her. "You're not the kind of man who exhausts," she said. She said it matter-of-factly, not as a compliment exactly, just as the assessment it was. He's miscalculated. Wyatt held her gaze for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully parse, something quiet and private moving behind his eyes before it settled back. "Lily's better?" he asked. "Completely." She was annoyed about missing 2 days of the cattle count. Holt saved the sheets for her. "I know she has strong feelings about incomplete records." Something moved through his expression that was definitely the corner of his mouth this time, not suppressed quite fast enough. She filed it with the others and went to refill his coffee. December brought the cold properly, the kind of cold that had serious intentions, and with it something Amelia had not anticipated: Christmas. She hadn't planned for it, or rather she had been avoiding planning for it because planning for Christmas at the Double M required admitting that she had no idea anymore when she was leaving, and she had not yet had the private conversation with herself that this admission required. Lily planned for it with sufficient enthusiasm for both of them. She had been, it emerged, keeping a list. The list had been compiled over weeks, with input from Denny, who had told her what the ranch had done for Christmas in previous years, not much and inadequately, and from Cal, who had said they'd had a decent meal one year when the former housekeeper had felt like making the effort, and from Holt, who had said he didn't have an opinion, but whose expression when Lily asked about decorations suggested that he might, privately, have some feelings on the subject. Lily presented the list to Amelia on a Sunday morning with the seriousness of a foreman presenting a work order. "I need your thoughts," Lily said. Amelia looked at the list. It was written in Lily's small, precise hand on a piece of paper she'd gotten from Holt's supply of tally sheets, and it covered a reasonable range, a proper meal, some kind of decoration, something for each of the hands. "Where did you plan to get the money for gifts for the hands?" Amelia asked. "I was going to ask you," Lily said. "That's not really planning, that's delegating." "It's both," Lily said. Amelia looked at the list again. "Some of this I can do with what's in the pantry, the decoration. There are pine branches along the east fence line. That costs nothing." She thought for a moment. "For the men, I have enough put aside for something small. Not much." "It doesn't have to be much," Lily said. "Holt said the year they got nothing he didn't mind, but it would have been nice to get something." "When did Holt tell you that?" "While I was doing the tally sheets." Lily straightened the paper with 2 fingers. "He said a lot of things while I was doing the tally sheets. He talks more than people think." Amelia had suspected as much. She told Wyatt about the Christmas plan that evening, not asking permission, simply informing him the way she informed him of anything that involved the ranch's resources. "Lily's organized Christmas," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Organized how?" "Dinner, decorations, small gifts for the men." She paused. "I'll cover the gifts from my own money. The dinner's mostly pantry items. Use the ranch account for the gifts," he said. "You don't have to—" "Lily's right that the men should get something," he said. "Use the ranch account." She nodded. Then, because something in his tone had caught her attention, "Did you ever do Christmas here before?" "When the previous housekeeper was—" "Once," he said. "Years ago." He didn't elaborate and she didn't push it, but she noted the particular quality of his brevity, the way it closed around something. Whatever Christmas had been before at the Double M, it had not been a good memory. She filed this too. It was Holt who brought her the first real warning about what Whitmore was building toward. She found him in the barn on a Tuesday in mid-December, doing something to a bridle that didn't appear to actually need doing, which meant he was thinking about something and needed something for his hands while he did it. "You all right?" she asked, filling the feed buckets. "Heard something in town yesterday," he said. He didn't look up from the bridle. "Whitmore's been talking to Morrison." Morrison was the largest landowner in the county after Wyatt, a man Amelia had met once, briefly, at the general store. Big, affable in the surface way of men who kept their actual thinking private. "About what?" she asked. "About the Eastern water rights case," Holt said. "About whether Morrison might want to lend Whitmore his lawyer's time. Morrison's got the same firm in Denver." He paused. "And about whether there might be an arrangement, if the case went Whitmore's way, about the southern boundary between Morrison's land and the Double M." Amelia set down the feed bucket. "He's trying to bring Morrison in." Trying to show Morrison there's something in it for him. Holt finally looked up. Morrison's not Whitmore. He doesn't have a personal quarrel with Wyatt, but he's got the same instinct every big landowner's got. He'd rather have less competition than more. Does Wyatt know? I'm telling you first, Holt said, which was the second time someone had brought her serious news in that phrasing, and she thought about what that meant. That the men had, without any formal arrangement, decided she was the person on this ranch who handled information. She found Wyatt that evening and told him what Holt had said. He listened in the way he listened to serious things, which was completely without performing concern. Morrison and I have history, he said. Good history or complicated history? Complicated. He moved to the window. Outside, the December dark was total, the stars hidden by cloud cover. We were friendly once, less so after a disagreement about water use 3 summers ago. Nothing legal, just we stopped being friendly. Could you be friendly again? He looked at her. If you could go to Morrison directly, she said, before Whitmore convinces him there's an arrangement worth having. If Morrison understood that Whitmore's using him, Morrison knows when he's being used, Wyatt said. He usually decides whether the terms are acceptable. Then give him better terms. She was thinking as she talked, which she did sometimes, working a problem out loud. Not land terms, not legal terms. What does Morrison actually want that he doesn't have? Wyatt was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. His son wants to learn cattle operations, Wyatt said finally. Morrison's got 3 daughters who'll inherit, and a son who's 20 and has no interest in ranching and no skills for it, and Morrison's been trying to change that for 2 years without success. So offer the son a season here, she said, working with Cal and Holt, learning it properly. Wyatt looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name. That's, he started. It's a trade, she said, not charity, not politics. Morrison gets something real for his son. You get Morrison out of Whitmore's orbit. She paused. Would the men accept it? A young man who doesn't know what he's doing? They've dealt with Denny, he said. Denny's improved considerably, she said, with some fairness to Denny. Wyatt thought about it for several days. She could see him thinking about it in the way he had of carrying something in his expression without naming it aloud. A particular quality of attention that meant a problem was being worked and not yet resolved. He rode out to Morrison's property on a Friday. He came back that evening and told her that Morrison had agreed. And Whitmore? She asked. Morrison told him he'd decided to stay out of other men's legal disputes. Something in Wyatt's voice was close to satisfaction. Whitmore's going to know exactly why. Good, she said. He looked at her across the kitchen table. The lamp was between them, making the room small and amber, and outside the wind was moving across the property in the way December wind did, not dramatically, just with the steady insistence of something that had time and patience on its side. You're good at this, he said. At what? People, he said, understanding what they actually want. She thought about it. My husband used to say I overthought everyone's motivations, she said. It was the first time she'd brought Thomas into a conversation here, and she felt the small change in the room that came from a new fact entering a space. Did he? Wyatt said. It wasn't quite a question. He wasn't wrong, she said. I do overthink them, but it's also how I know when someone's after something they're not saying and what the real thing is underneath the thing they're saying. She paused. That's why fighting him on the technical legal ground alone isn't enough. Because winning on technical ground doesn't satisfy him. Because winning on technical ground might make him more determined, she said. You need him to look like he's failing at the thing he actually wanted, which is being seen as the more powerful man. Wyatt was quiet for a long moment. You should have been a lawyer. I should have been a lot of things, she said, and she meant it without self-pity, just as a plain fact about the way life organized itself differently than planned. Well, 2 days before Christmas, Nathan Whitmore made his first real mistake. Amelia found out about it at the women's circle, which she had continued attending with the same practical regularity she brought to anything that provided useful information. Dot told her, in the direct way Dot told things. He went to talk to the county clerk about your daughter, Dot said. Amelia went very still. About Lily. about whether a child with her circumstances should be in a working ranch environment. Dot's mouth was set in a line that Amelia had not seen on her before. He used the word neglect. He said a mother who couldn't provide proper facilities for a disabled child and was instead keeping her in a rough ranch environment might be of interest to the county welfare officer. The women's circle was quiet, not the uncertain quiet of before, when people were waiting to see which way things were going to go. This was a different kind of quiet. "That's what he said," Margaret Avery said. She was looking at Amelia with an expression that had resolved into something clear. "I heard it myself. I was in the clerk's office." Amelia kept her hands flat on her knees. She was aware of the effort this required. "What did the clerk do?" she asked. "Nothing yet," Margaret said, "but Whitmore is planning to file a formal report." She paused. "I came to tell you before he could." Amelia looked at her. "He went too far," Margaret said simply. "Nobody with sense is going to take that child from her mother and put her in a county facility. But he'll make it uncomfortable, and he'll use it to distract Wyatt from the water rights case." "He's trying to open two fronts," Amelia said. "Yes," what Ruth, who hadn't spoken, said. "What can we do?" Amelia thought about it carefully, because this required more care than anger, and she had a considerable amount of anger to manage right now. "Letters," she said, "to the county welfare officer, from people in town who have observed Lily in her environment. At the ranch, in town. Factual letters, what they've seen, what they know." She looked around the circle. "People whose names carry weight with the county." "I'll write one," Dot said immediately. "So will I," said Helen, the doctor's wife, quiet Helen, who hadn't said much in all the weeks Amelia had been coming to the circle. Margaret Avery said, "I'll have my husband write one." She looked at Amelia steadily. "He's on the county board." The shift in the room was palpable. Not dramatic, these were practical women, not given to drama, but real, the way a door opening is real even when it happens quietly. Amelia rode back to the Double M in the December cold with the letter plan organized in her mind, and also with the specific anger that came from a man going after her child, and she did not allow herself to feel it fully yet because she needed her mind clear. Later. She would feel it later, when there was room for it. She told Wyatt that night. His face, when she told him the specific words Whitmore had used, the word neglect, applied to Lily, went through several things very quickly and settled into something that was quiet and cold in a way she hadn't seen before. "He said that," Wyatt said, "in the county clerk's office, in front of Margaret Avery and at least two other people." Wyatt stood up from the table. He walked to the window. He stood there for a while. "I want to go talk to him," he said. "I know," she said. "Don't." "Amelia, don't," she said again. "If you go to him angry, you give him exactly what he wants. Proof that this is personal. Proof that you're reactive, something his lawyer can use." She waited until he turned from the window. "The letters will handle the welfare officer. Henderson handles the water rights. And Whitmore—" She paused. "Whitmore gets to stand there with nothing because every avenue he tried has been closed by people he underestimated." Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. "He went after Lily," he said. There was something in his voice that she had not heard before. Not rage, something older than rage and quieter. "I know," she said. "She counts the cattle every afternoon," he said. "She has opinions about calf names. She told Denny last week that his hat was unflattering, and she was correct." He stopped. "She doesn't know yet what he tried to do." "No." "She's not going to know." "No," Amelia agreed. They were quiet together in the kitchen with the cold pressing against the windows and the lamp making its small amber world between them, and Amelia let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of the last 2 months, the train platform and Nathan Whitmore's face, and the $23 and the porch boards and learning to ride, and Holt sitting outside the bedroom door while Lily's fever broke, and the letters being written right now across Silver Creek by women who had made a decision. She let herself feel it, and then she set it aside because there was still tomorrow, and the day after that, and the water rights case had 6 months to run, and the ranch needed to get through winter first. "He's not going to win," she said. Wyatt looked at her. "I want you to know I believe that," she said. "Not as a thing to say, As a fact, I've worked out. He held her gaze, and in his expression was something she'd been aware of for weeks. Something she'd been filing away under things to feel later. Something that was getting harder to defer because later kept arriving, and she kept finding herself still here, still at this table, still adding things to the file. I know you mean it, he said quietly. That's the part that gets me. Outside, the December wind moved across the ranch, cold and patient, testing every seal, and inside the kitchen the lamp held its ground. Christmas came to the Double M without fanfare, and with more warmth than the ranch had seen in years, though nobody said this aloud because saying it aloud would have required acknowledging how little warmth there had been before. Lily's list had been executed with the precision she brought to the cattle tally sheets. Pine branches along the windowsills and the mantel, cut by Denny under Lily's supervision and arranged by Lily herself from her chair with the focused attention of someone who had strong opinions about the distribution of greenery. A proper meal, salt pork roasted low and long, cornbread, dried apple pie from the apples she'd found in the cellar in October, and set aside specifically for this. Small gifts for the men, wrapped in brown paper, a good knife for Cal, tobacco for Holt, new gloves for Denny, a pocket almanac for the fourth hand, a quiet man named Price who read everything he could get his hands on and never said much about it. The men ate at the long kitchen table for the first time altogether, which required squeezing slightly and an adjustment of elbows that nobody complained about. Cal said the roast was the best thing he'd eaten in 3 years. Denny said the pie was better than the roast. Holt opened his tobacco, smelled it, and nodded once with the expression of a man who had been understood. Wyatt sat at the end of the table and looked for approximately 40 minutes like a man who had forgotten there were things to worry about. Lily, sitting beside him, told a lengthy story about a book she was reading that had a horse in it who made consistently poor decisions. The horse keeps going left when it should go right, she said. Every time. You can see it coming. Why do you keep reading it? Wyatt asked. Because I want to see if the horse eventually figures it out, Lily said. So far, no. How far along are you? 3/4. That's not encouraging for the horse. No, Lily agreed seriously. It's not. Amelia watched this exchange from her end of the table and felt the things she'd been filing away under later press against the folder's edges with more force than usual. She looked down at her plate and stayed there until the feeling organized itself into something manageable. Later that evening, after the men had gone to the bunkhouse and Lily was asleep with Reckless half inside the window in a compromise that satisfied nobody entirely, Wyatt found Amelia on the front porch. She was standing at the porch rail looking out at the dark. The snow from November had compacted and crusted, and the clear night made it faintly luminous, the whole property laid out in blues and grays. Cold out here, he said. I know. She hadn't come out for the temperature. She'd come out because the kitchen felt small in a way that was becoming difficult to ignore, and she needed a minute with a larger space around her. He came and stood beside her at the rail. Not close exactly, but close enough that she was aware of the specific weight of his presence, which was different from the men who had stood beside her in her life before, different from Thomas, who had been warm and impractical and beloved, different from Nathan Whitmore, who had stood close to her exactly once on a train platform and made her feel like an inconvenience, different from the men at the women's circle's husbands, who occupied space with the comfortable thoughtlessness of men who had never had reason to consider how they occupied it. Wyatt occupied space like a man who knew exactly how much he was taking up and had decided it was the right amount. Thank you, he said, for today. Lily organized it. Lily had a vision, he said. You executed it. Those are different jobs. She looked out at the snow. It was a good day. Yes, he said. They stood there for a while. Somewhere out on the property, an owl called and went quiet. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask me anything, he said. Whether I'll answer is a separate question. The previous housekeeper, she said. The one who left in March. What happened? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to take the separate question option. Her name was Agnes, he said finally. She'd been here 6 years. She left because... He stopped. Started again. There was a man in town she'd been seeing. He wanted to go to California. She went with him. That's all? That's the part I know, he said. The part I think about is that she was here 6 years, and when she left, the house looked exactly the same as it had when she arrived. Nothing different. Nothing that stayed. He paused. I didn't notice at the time. I've been thinking about it since you got here. Amelia looked at him. That's not a criticism of Agnes, he said. She did the work she was paid to do. But there was nothing of her in this place. Nothing of anyone. He seemed to be working something out that he hadn't said aloud before. I thought that was normal. I thought a house was a thing you maintained. I didn't think it was supposed to feel like... He stopped. Like someone lives in it, she said. Yes. The owl called again, further away this time. I want to tell you something, Wyatt said. And I want to say it plainly because I don't do well when I try to be careful about things. She waited. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's happened here, he said. In this house. With you and Lily. He looked at her directly. I'm not going to try to dress it up in employer and housekeeper language because that's not honest, and you've been straight with me from the beginning, and you deserve the same back. Wyatt, I'm not asking you for anything right now, he said. I know you came here with a plan to leave, and I know that plan has been getting harder to see clearly, and I know that's partly because of me, and I'm not apologizing for that, but I want to name it. He turned back to the dark. You should know that I'm aware of it, and that I'm not in the habit of saying things I don't mean. Amelia held onto the porch rail. I'm aware of it too, she said. It came out quieter than she intended, but it came out true, which was the more important thing. He nodded once, as if that was enough for now. They stood there until the cold got serious about it, and then they went inside. January was hard, in the way that January in Colorado was always hard. Not dramatically, not with the single spectacular storm that stories were made of, but with the grinding insistence of sustained cold and the accumulated weight of weeks without relief. The cattle needed more attention. The fences needed constant checking. 2 of the water troughs froze solid and required breaking out every morning before the animals could drink, which was a job that fell to Denny and which Denny performed without complaint, which was the most telling sign of how much he had grown since October. The welfare officer came on a Thursday in the second week of January. His name was Aldred, a county appointment, a thin man in his 50s with the careful movements of someone who had been doing a difficult and thankless job for a long time and had developed a manner that was neither warm nor unkind, simply professional in the way of people who processed a lot of situations and couldn't afford to invest in each one. He came with a notebook. He sat at the kitchen table. Amelia offered him coffee, and he accepted it. I have 8 letters in my file about this household, he said, opening the notebook. Regarding the child Lily Carter, age 6. I know about the letters, Amelia said. I'm glad people took the time. The complaint filed against you is from Nathan Whitmore, Aldred said, claiming the child is being raised in conditions unsuitable for her needs. Would you like to see the house? She said. He would. She showed him, calmly, without editorial, simply showing him the rooms in their current state, which was better than their state in October by a considerable measure. The bedroom, the ground floor access, the cleared paths, the low table Holt had built near the barn. She took him to the barn where Lily was doing the afternoon tally with Holt, because there was no reason to hide it, and every reason not to. Lily looked up when they came in. This is Mr. Aldred, Amelia said. He works for the county. Hello, Lily said, with the evaluating expression she used on new people. Hello, Aldred said. He looked at the tally sheet, the low table, Holt standing nearby doing something industrious with a piece of tack. What are you counting? Cattle, Lily said. We have 112 right now. 4 are young enough to still be counted separately. She showed him the tally sheet with the professional air of someone who kept accurate records and was not shy about it. Aldred looked at the sheet, then at Lily, then at the table Holt had built. Who made this table? He asked. Holt did, Lily said. He measured it to be exactly the right height. He measured it 3 times to make sure. Aldred wrote something in his notebook. Outside afterward, he looked at the cleared paths, the ramp on the back porch, the wide doorways of the first floor. The complaint says there are no appropriate facilities, he said. The complaint was filed in November, Amelia said. Some of those things were already in place. Others have been added since. By who? By the people who live and work here, she said, who saw what was needed and built it. Aldred made another note. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the property. In 20 years of this work, he said, without looking at her, I have removed children from their homes when their homes were places of real harm. I have also been asked, on occasion, to remove children from homes that were inconvenient to someone else's interests. He capped his pen. I can tell the difference. Oops. He came back inside, finished his coffee, thanked her for her time, and left. She heard later from Margaret that the welfare officer had written a brief report recommending no further action and noting that the complaint appeared to be without factual basis. When she told Wyatt, he was in the barn doing the evening check, and he went quiet in the way he did when something landed that he'd been braced for longer than he'd admitted. Good, he said. Aldred seemed like a decent man. He is, Wyatt said. I've met him. He buries a lot of real cases because he's got too much territory and not enough resources. He paused. The fact that he came out personally means he took it seriously enough to want to see for himself. He saw Lily doing the tally. Something crossed Wyatt's face. Of course she was doing the tally. She showed him the sheet, Amelia said, in some detail. He shook his head slowly, not in frustration, more like a man absorbing something that kept being better than he expected. Commit. Whitmore's response to the failed welfare complaint was to do what men did when their subtler approaches didn't land. He got less subtle. The rumors changed in character. Where before they had been about Amelia's suitability, her history, her judgment in coming west, the liability she represented, they became in February about Wyatt, about the water rights case, which Whitmore was now framing publicly as a sign of weakness rather than a legal dispute, about the Double M's finances, which Whitmore claimed were strained, though this was not true, and the people who knew anything about the ranch's actual operation knew it wasn't true. And he started talking about Wyatt's past. Amelia heard about this from Dot, who was the most reliable of her Silver Creek information sources because Dot had no investment in softening things. He's been telling people about a woman named Clara, Dot said. Amelia kept her expression neutral. Who's Clara? Wyatt's wife, Dot said. Was. She died 5 years ago. Amelia hadn't known Wyatt had been married. She understood now why certain silences had the shape they had. What is Whitmore saying about her, she asked. That Wyatt was responsible for her death, Dot said. He's not explicit about it. He says things like, there are those who wonder and I only know what I've heard. You know the kind of language. What actually happened? Dot looked at her steadily. I knew Clara. She was sick for 2 years before she died. Something in her lungs. Nothing to do with Wyatt or the ranch. She just got sick, and then she died. She paused. Wyatt took it hard. He closed up. The ranch got neglected, and he got distant, I suppose. It lasted a while. Amelia thought about the house as it had been in October, the unwashed windows and the porch boards and the pantry with its random accumulation of staples without system, the way the ranch had felt like a place being maintained by a man who was present but not entirely there. He doesn't know Whitmore's saying this, she said. I don't believe so, Dot said. She told him that evening. She told him the way she told him all difficult things, directly, without softening it to the point where the actual information got lost. He listened with his face very still. Clara, he said when she'd finished. Yes. He didn't say anything for a while. She waited, because she'd learned that his silences were working silences, not empty ones. She was sick for 2 years, he said finally. The doctor in Denver said there was nothing to be done from the beginning, but we tried Denver and then Santa Fe and then Denver again. He looked at the table. She wanted to come home at the end. We came back here. He paused. I was with her. I know, Amelia said. Whitmore knows too, he said. He was at the funeral. He shook my hand. His voice had the particular flatness of a man containing something that had no good expression. He waited 5 years to use it. Because before, there was nothing it could damage, she said. Now there's this. He looked at her. He's not attacking your past, she said. He's attacking what you're building now. The water rights case is legal, and Henderson is handling it, and it's going to go Whitmore's way, or it isn't based on the evidence. But what Whitmore can't control with lawyers is what people in Silver Creek think of you, so he's attacking that. By using Clara. Yes. Wyatt stood up from the table and walked to the window in the way he did when he needed to move and had nowhere to go. She watched him stand there. I don't know what to do with that, he said. It came out with an honesty that was clearly uncomfortable for him, the honesty of a man admitting a limit. You don't have to do anything with it, she said. The people in Silver Creek who knew Clara know the truth. The people who didn't know her will see the difference between a man who's been running this ranch for 15 years and a man who's been making legal threats and filing welfare complaints about a 6-year-old. She paused. Whitmore's been spending a lot of his credibility lately. He doesn't have as much of it left as he thinks he does. Wyatt turned from the window. His expression was harder to read than usual, something in it that was more raw than he typically showed. Do you ever get tired of being right about people? He asked. Frequently, she said. It would be much easier if people were more surprising. Something shifted in his face that was not quite a smile but was in that neighborhood. There's something I want to tell you, he said, about Clara. He came back to the table and sat down but didn't immediately continue, in the way of someone choosing the right door into a difficult room. I wasn't a good husband to her in the last years. Not in any dramatic way. I didn't leave. I didn't stop caring for her. But I was so focused on fighting what was happening that I stopped actually being present with her. He looked at his hands. She told me once, in the second year of it, that she would rather have me there. Actually there, not managing the situation, than have me trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. He paused. I didn't know how to do that. I kept trying to fix it. Amelia didn't say anything yet. She knew this wasn't finished. When she died, he said, the thing I kept coming back to wasn't the grief, or not only the grief, it was that she'd told me what she needed and I'd heard her, but I hadn't listened. There's a difference. He looked up. I've spent 5 years running this ranch and not letting anyone close enough that I'd have to figure out how to listen again, because I wasn't sure I knew how. She held his gaze. You know how, she said. You've been doing it since October. With Lily, with me. She said it simply, not as reassurance, just as what she'd seen. You listened when Lily told you how to help her out of the wagon. You listened when I told you about Whitmore and the surveyor, and you didn't go confront him even though you wanted to. You listened when I said Morrison was the move. She paused. Listening isn't a talent you either have or don't have. It's a choice you make. He was quiet for a long time. You know what Whitmore can't stand? He said finally. Several things. That I'm better off than I was before, he said. That's what this is. He thought I was diminished, closed up, running the ranch on instinct and not much else. And then you came and the house got, he paused, searching, alive again. And Lily counts the cattle, and the men eat well and work better for it, and Morrison's son is coming in April. He looked at her directly. He looked at what's happened here since October, and he saw something worth attacking. That's how I know it's real. Amelia felt the file folder give way entirely, not dramatically. She was not a dramatic person, and this was not a dramatic moment in the cinematic sense. It was simply the ordinary surrender of a position she'd been holding past the point where holding it made sense. I was going to leave, she said. I know. I kept telling myself I was going to leave. I know that too, he said. I don't know what I'm doing, she said, with more honesty than she usually allowed herself in the same sentence. I came here with a plan that lasted about 4 hours. I've been improvising since October and trying to make it look like I know what I'm doing. You do know what you're doing, he said. I know what the ranch needs, and I know what Lily needs, and I know what you need in the most practical sense of what you need, she said. That's different from knowing what I'm doing in the larger sense. What do you need? He asked. In the practical sense. She thought about it seriously because he'd asked it seriously. Time, she said, and for things not to be decided for me. She paused. I had a lot of things decided for me in the years before I came here. I'd like to do the deciding myself. All right, he said. That's it? All right? What else would I say? She looked at him. Most people argue with it. Most people aren't listening, he said. February turned to March with the slow reluctance of a Colorado winter that had gotten comfortable and didn't see the urgency. The snow lingered in the hollows and on the north faces of rises, gray and dense, but the days were lengthening visibly, and the cattle moved differently in the fields, with the slightly more purposeful energy of animals that sensed the season coming. The water rights hearing was scheduled for April in Denver. Henderson sent a letter in early March saying the documentation was strong and that Whitmore's selective evidence had been countered. He did not promise a win. Henderson, as Wyatt had described him, was not a man who promised things he couldn't guarantee, but his letter had a confidence in its structure that meant something. Morrison's son arrived on a Monday in mid-March to begin his season. His name was James, and he was 20 years old, taller than his father, with the slightly overwhelmed expression of a young man who had agreed to something before fully understanding what it would require. Cal looked at him the way Cal looked at all new information, evaluating without expression, and then said, "Come with me," and took him to the barn and started teaching him something immediately, which was the Double M's version of a welcome. Lily met him at dinner. "Do you know how to ride?" she asked. "Some," he said. "Wyatt taught Mama to ride," she said. "She was scared at first, but she's better now." She paused. "She doesn't grip wrong anymore." "I never gripped wrong," Amelia said. "You gripped wrong for 2 weeks," Lily said, with the implacable accuracy of a child who noticed things. James Morrison looked between them with the expression of someone trying to calibrate the social temperature of his new situation, and then he looked at Holt, who said nothing, and at Cal, who also said nothing, and at Denny, who grinned. "Is it always like this?" James asked Denny quietly. "More or less," Denny said. "It's better than it was." The thing Amelia had not planned for, and perhaps should have, was Wyatt asking her directly. It was March, a Thursday, an ordinary day. She had been to town for supplies. The wagon had a wheel that needed attention. James was improving at a rate that seemed to surprise Cal, who mentioned it in the oblique way Cal mentioned things he considered worth noting. Nothing in the day had signaled that it was going to be a different kind of day. He found her in the kitchen after Lily was in bed, which was the usual time, the usual lamp, the usual coffee. But he sat down with the particular quality of a man who had made a decision and intended to follow through with it, and she recognized it because she'd seen it before, on the wagon ride from town the first day, when he'd offered her the job. The same settled stillness. "I want to ask you to marry me," he said. She looked at him. "I said I'd let you decide things," he said. "So I'm not asking you to say yes. I'm telling you I'm asking, and that I'm asking because I mean it, and that I'm going to be over here," he indicated the chair, "while you think about it for as long as you need." "That's a very considered way to propose," she said. "I'm a considered person." "I've noticed." She looked at the lamp for a moment, at the small, steady flame of it. "I'm not easy to live with," she said. "Neither am I. I have opinions about pantries and floorboards, and I will reorganize things that don't need reorganizing, and I will tell you when I think you're wrong." "You've been doing all of that since October," he said. "I'm aware." "Lily comes with me," she said. "That's not a condition, it's just, that's the fact of it." "Lily's half the reason I'm asking," he said. She felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a word for exactly. Not happiness, or not only happiness, more like the recognition of something she'd already known for some time and had simply been avoiding naming. "You'd need to give me time to think about how we do it properly," she said. "How we talk to Lily, how we handle the legal arrangements. I want things to be clear." "That's fair." "And I want it to be understood between us that this is a partnership," she said. "Not," she searched, "not a rescue. I'm not being rescued. You're not being rescued. We're two people deciding." "That's exactly what it is," he said. She looked at him across the lamp. "Then yes," she said. He didn't move immediately, as if the word needed a moment to settle into its right place. "Yes," he said, trying it. "Yes," she confirmed. Outside, the March wind ran across the property, lighter than January's wind, lighter than December's, with something in it that was almost but not yet warm. The suggestion of warm, the memory of it, the promise that it was coming even if it hadn't arrived. The mountains to the west were still snow-covered and vast and completely indifferent to the small-lit kitchen below them, and the lamp held its light, and Reckless scratched at the side door to be let in, which was not allowed, and Amelia got up and let her in anyway, because there were rules and then there was a cold March night, and she knew which one mattered more. Reckless slept at the foot of the bed that night and every night after, which was not a rule anyone had formally revised, but which nobody enforced anymore either, because some battles choose their own endings. The days between the proposal and telling Lily were 3, which was how long it took Amelia to find the right moment. Not the right words exactly, because she'd learned that with Lily, the words mattered less than the honesty behind them, and the honesty was straightforward enough. What she needed was the right moment, the kind of ordinary quiet in which large information landed better than it did in formally arranged conversations. It came on a Sunday morning, Lily at the kitchen table with her book about the horse that kept going left, Reckless under the table in violation of 3 separate household policies, the stove making its ticking sounds. Amelia sat down across from her with 2 cups of cocoa, a luxury she'd bought in town and rationed carefully, and slid one across. Lily looked up. She could tell when something was coming. She'd always been able to tell. "Wyatt asked me to marry him," Amelia said. Lily put her book down with the deliberateness of someone giving a subject its full attention. "What did you say?" she asked. "I said, yes." Lily picked up her cocoa, held it. "Did you say yes because of us, or because of him?" Amelia looked at her daughter. 6 years old, going on something considerably older. "Both," she said, "in the way that both things are true at the same time and neither one cancels the other." Lily thought about this with the seriousness she gave to real questions. "He fixed the path to the barn," she said finally, "after the rain, without being asked. I know. And he listened to me about the wagon that first day, how to help me down." She turned the cup in her hands. "Some people don't listen about that. They just pick you up." "He's not a person who decides in advance how things should be done," Amelia said. Lily was quiet for another moment. Outside, the March morning was doing something tentative with the light, the sun coming through the east window at the low angle that meant winter wasn't entirely finished but had loosened its grip. "Does he know the horse in my book keeps going left?" she asked. "He knows." "Okay," Lily said. She picked up her book again. "The horse finally goes right in chapter 11. I didn't tell him that." "I'll let you tell him," Amelia said. "I was planning to," Lily said, in the tone of someone who had already decided this. Wyatt's reaction to being told, later that morning, that Lily had given her approval and also had information about Chapter 11 was to go find Lily and sit down beside her at the kitchen table and ask about the horse. Amelia stood in the doorway and watched them, the man and the child, their heads bent over the book, while Lily explained the narrative arc with the precision of a very small literary critic, and she felt something settle in her chest with the finality of something that had been looking for its place for a long time. April arrived, and with it the water rights hearing in Denver, and the complicated logistics of Wyatt being gone for what turned out to be a week. He took the train on a Monday. Cal ran the ranch with the quiet competence of a man who had, in any practical sense, been running it alongside Wyatt for years. James Morrison, 3 weeks into his season, was useful in the basic ways now, and was developing opinions about cattle management that Cal said were not entirely wrong, which from Cal was almost effusive. Amelia managed the house and the men's meals, and the accounts, and the letters that needed writing, and the ongoing matter of the caulking on the north windows, which she had gotten to finally on a day in late March when the temperature allowed it, kneeling on the porch with a putty knife, and the focused attention she brought to things that had been waiting too long. She told herself she wasn't watching the road for the wagon. She was watching the road for the wagon. He came back on a Friday, late afternoon, and she knew from the way he came up the drive, not slowly, not with the dragged-out quality of a man who had lost something, that it had gone well before he said a word. He came in, and she had coffee for him, and he sat down and told her. Henderson had gotten the countervailing survey admitted. The original deed language, properly interpreted with the survey evidence, supported Wyatt's access to the Eastern Creek. The judge had ruled in 2 hours. Not a long deliberation, Henderson had said, which was its own kind of signal. Nathan Whitmore's claim had been dismissed. Legal costs were assessed against Whitmore, which Henderson had pushed for and gotten, and which was not a small amount. "It's done," Wyatt said. She let out a breath she'd been holding in some form since November. "Henderson was good," Wyatt said. "You said he would be." "I've said it before without being as sure as I sounded," he said. "This time I was sure." She sat down across from him. The late afternoon light came through the kitchen window at the angle that turned everything gold, the way it did for about 20 minutes in April before the sun dropped behind the ridge. It was her favorite light in the house. She'd noticed it first in late October, and she'd been watching for it since. "What does Whitmore do now?" she asked. "He pays the legal fees," Wyatt said. "He goes back to his ranch. He finds something else to care about." He paused. "He's not going to stop disliking us. But he's run out of legal roads, and the community knows it." "Margaret Avery will make sure the community knows it," Amelia said. "Margaret's been making sure the community knows things for 30 years, Wyatt agreed. "In this case, it works in our favor." He drank his coffee. She watched the light move across the table, the slow gold of it, the way it made ordinary things look briefly significant. "There's something I want to say about Whitmore," she said. "And I want to say it before we put it away and move on, because I've been thinking about it." He waited. "He wasn't wrong that I didn't tell him about Lily's wheelchair specifically," she said. "I told him I had a daughter. I thought that was sufficient. I still think that was sufficient. But I've been honest enough with myself to know that part of me didn't say it clearly because I was afraid of exactly the reaction I got." She paused. "I was afraid he'd say no, and I needed him to say yes because I needed somewhere to go." Wyatt looked at her steadily. "That doesn't excuse what he did," she said. "The way he said it in public, with that particular, the way he looked at her." She stopped. "That's not excusable, but I've been carrying the other part separately, and I wanted to put it down somewhere real." "You're saying you weren't entirely without fault," he said. "I'm saying I was operating from fear and it made me less than fully honest, and I've been pretending that part doesn't exist because the thing he did was so much worse." She held his gaze. "Both things are true." He was quiet for a moment. "That took something," he said. "Saying that." "I've been saying it to myself for 4 months," she said. "It was time to say it out loud." "Does it change anything?" "No," she said. "It just stops being a weight I carry by myself." He nodded. That was enough. That was exactly the right amount. The wedding was on a Saturday in May, which was Lily's suggestion, because Lily had pointed out in March that May had the best light, and also that by May the mud from the spring thaw would be done, which was a practical consideration that nobody had thought of, and which turned out to be entirely correct. It was not a large affair, which suited both of them. The guest list was composed of the people who had shown up, in the various ways that showing up happened. Margaret Avery, who had written a letter, and whose husband had written a letter, and who arrived in a hat that communicated occasion. Dot, who wore her good dress and brought a pie that she set on the kitchen table without comment. Helen and her husband, the doctor, Ruth from the laundry, the Morrison family, James in his good clothes and his father looking at him with the particular expression of a man seeing his son differently than he had before. The sisters from the women's circle, who cried at appropriate moments. Cal, Holt, Denny, and Price, scrubbed and uncomfortable in their good clothes and standing together in a row with the grouped dignity of men who had decided to do this properly. Aldred, the welfare officer, came, which surprised her. He'd been invited on an impulse, a note sent to the county office, and she hadn't expected him to appear. He stood near the back and didn't stay long after, but he came, which she thought said something about the kind of man he was underneath the professional distance. Harlan from the grain store came, which was its own statement. The ceremony was short and plain, conducted by the county magistrate who drove out from Silver Creek and had the efficient manner of a man who did this regularly and understood that the people getting married cared about the marriage and not the ceremony. They stood on the front porch of the Double M, which was level now, had been level since October, and said what needed to be said in front of the people who had earned the right to hear it. Lily sat beside Wyatt through the whole thing, not in the role of flower girl or any arranged ceremonial part. She simply sat beside him because that was where she chose to be, and nobody had suggested otherwise. When the magistrate finished and Wyatt bent to sign the register, Lily said, at the volume of someone not trying to be quiet, but not being theatrical either, "The horse went right in chapter 11. Wyatt finished signing and looked at her. "Did it figure out why?" "Eventually," Lily said. "It took the whole book. But it got there." "It got there," she confirmed. Cal, overhearing, made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, which was the first time Amelia had heard him produce one in 6 months, and it seemed to loosen something in the gathering, and the afternoon opened up from there. The party, it became a party, as these things did when enough people were fed, and the weather cooperated and nobody was required to be formal anymore, ran until the early evening, when the mountains went pink and then purple, and the May sky took its time going dark the way it did in this part of Colorado, as if the day was reluctant to be over. Amelia moved through it in the half-present way she'd noticed herself moving through good things, the part of her that documented always running alongside the part of her that experienced. She was aware of Wyatt across the yard talking to Morrison Sr. with the ease of two men who had arrived at a working respect. She was aware of Lily holding court near the porch railing with the sisters from the women's circle, telling them something that required hand gestures. She was aware of Holt and Denny engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about fence post technique that neither of them had intended to turn into a party conversation, but had somehow arrived at anyway. Margaret Avery found her near the kitchen door. "You did well here," Margaret said. She said it plainly, not warmly exactly, but honestly, which was Margaret's version of a compliment and therefore worth more than someone else's elaborate one. "The ranch did well," Amelia said. "The ranch was running on habit and stubbornness when you got here," Margaret said. "Don't be modest about it. It doesn't suit you." Amelia looked at her. "I wasn't sure about you," Margaret said, "on the platform that day. When you said what you said to Nathan," she paused, "I thought you were brave. I also thought you might be the kind of brave that was just desperation wearing a good coat." "It might have been," Amelia said. "No," Margaret said. "I've seen that kind. It doesn't last 6 months. It doesn't build what you've built here." She looked out at the gathering, the yard full of people who had not been invited to this place 6 months ago and who were here now. "Nathan's going to have a hard time in this town for a while," she added. "People have long memories for a man who filed a welfare complaint against a child." "I'd rather people forgot it," Amelia said. "That's generous." "It's practical," she said. "If the community spends energy being angry at Nathan Whitmore, it doesn't spend that energy on anything useful." Margaret studied her. "You're going to be interesting to have around," she said, which from Margaret, Amelia had learned, was the highest form of praise she distributed. Dot appeared at her elbow with 2 glasses of the cider that Cal had produced from somewhere and deposited on the kitchen table without explanation. "Drink this," Dot said, handing her one. "It's your wedding." "I know it's my wedding." "You've been working it like a ranch operation," Dot said. "Drink the cider and stand still for 5 minutes." Amelia drank the cider and stood still for 5 minutes and looked at her wedding, which was imperfect and slightly crowded and running slightly later than she'd planned, and was, in every way that she could currently account for, exactly right. Nathan Whitmore left Silver Creek in June. He didn't announce it. He was not a man built for announced departures, which required a kind of self-awareness he'd never developed. He simply reduced his presence gradually, spending less time in town, and then the word came through the ordinary channels of a small community's information flow that he'd sold his ranch to a family from Kansas and relocated to Denver. Amelia heard about it from Dot on a Thursday, the same way she heard most things. "Gone," Dot said. "When?" "End of May, apparently. Harlan said the sale was quiet. He had offers earlier but kept holding out." Dot seemed to consider whether to say the next thing and decided to say it. "I think he held out hoping the water rights case would go his way and change the value of the land." "It didn't." "No." Dot paused. "You feel anything about it?" Amelia thought about this honestly. "Less than I expected to," she said. "I spent so long tracking what he was doing that I think I used up the feeling on that." "That's probably healthy," Dot said. "Or it's just done," Amelia said. "Some things end and you feel it. Some things end and you mostly feel the absence of weight." She told Wyatt that evening, briefly, because it was information he should have and because there was nothing left to manage about it. He was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said, not with satisfaction, just with the finality of something concluded. "That's all?" she asked. "What else is there?" He looked at her. "He's gone. The water rights are settled. The ranch is—" He paused. "The ranch is better than it's been in 5 years. He doesn't get any more of our attention." "Agreed," she said. And that was, genuinely, that. She noticed that she meant it. The summer that followed was the first summer at the Double M that Amelia experienced from the inside, as a person who belonged to the place rather than a person making a provisional arrangement with it. It was different in ways she hadn't anticipated. The work was the same. The endless maintenance of a working ranch, the heat that arrived seriously in July and stayed, the cattle requiring constant attention through the dry weeks when the grass went brown and the water in the creek ran lower, and they had to manage the rotation carefully. None of that was new. What was new was the quality of her presence in it, the way she moved through the days without the background noise of the leaving plan, without the constant internal accounting of how many months until she had enough saved and where she would go and what the next version of her life would look like. This was the version. This was what it looked like. It was not smooth. That needs to be said plainly, because the temptation with the end of a hard story is to suggest that the resolution makes everything easy, and it doesn't, and anyone who tells you it does has never actually arrived at one. She and Wyatt disagreed about things. About money. He was less meticulous about the accounts than she was, not careless, just less granular, and she had opinions about the granularity that he did not always share. About the ranch hand's workload during the hot weeks, when she thought they were being pushed too hard, and he thought they were experienced men who knew their limits. About James Morrison, who had turned out to have a genuine aptitude for cattle, and who Wyatt wanted to offer a permanent position when his season ended, and who Amelia thought should be allowed to make that decision without pressure, which was a distinction Wyatt initially didn't see and then, after a longer conversation than either of them had planned, did. These disagreements didn't damage anything. They were the texture of two people sharing a life and a livelihood, the ordinary friction of two minds that didn't always reach the same conclusion through the same path. She had been afraid, somewhere underneath, that this was the part that would be harder than she'd anticipated. She found instead that it was manageable, not because they always resolved the disagreements cleanly, but because neither of them made the disagreements mean more than they were. Lily turned 7 in August. They made her a cake, which was Amelia's doing, and gave her a new book about horses, which was Wyatt's. A better book than the one she'd finished, he'd been told by the woman at the Silver Creek General Store who ordered books, one where the horses made more reasonable decisions. Cal gave her a leather cord bracelet he'd made himself, which she wore every day. Holt gave her a proper leather-bound journal for the cattle tallies, with her name stamped on the front. Denny gave her 3 hair ribbons in different colors, because he'd asked what she wanted and she'd told him. She blew out the candle on her cake and said, when asked what she'd wished for, that she wasn't telling. "You're allowed to tell after," Denny said. "Who made that rule?" Lily asked. Denny considered. "I thought that was a rule." "It's not a rule," Lily said. "Then I made it up," Denny admitted. "You don't have to tell." Lily looked around the table, at the ranch hands in their various states of Sunday cleanliness, at Wyatt on her left, at her mother on her right, at Reckless under the table who had gotten a piece of salt pork for her birthday by maneuvering of unclear origin. "I wished for a longer summer," she said, "so I could finish mapping the south pasture before the cold comes back." Cal said, "That's a practical wish." "I'm a practical person," Lily said. James Morrison decided to stay, which he announced at the end of August with the slightly anxious manner of a young man who wasn't sure how the announcement would land. Wyatt told him the terms, and James said yes and shook hands on it with the seriousness of someone who understood he was entering something real. His father came out to see him in September and walked the property with Wyatt in the way ranchers walked each other's land, attentively, reading it, asking the occasional question that contained more knowledge than it led on. He found James at the south fence line, repairing a post with Holt, and he stood there for a moment watching before James noticed him. Amelia saw this from the porch, the father watching the son work, the expression on the father's face, the moment when James looked up and saw him there. She thought about what Wyatt had said in November about listening, about the difference between hearing someone and actually listening. She thought about Morrison, who had a son who hadn't been interested in ranching and had gotten him a season at the Double M instead of continuing to argue with him about it, and how different that was from deciding in advance what someone needed and providing that instead. She thought about Lily on the train, taking stock of Silver Creek through the window. She thought about the platform. She thought about Nathan Whitmore's face. She thought, and this was the thought she'd been working toward for months, without knowing it was what she was working toward, that the world had a deep and consistent preference for sorting people into categories before it knew them, that it was comfortable with wheelchair and liability and burden and useful and capable, and deeply uncomfortable with the possibility that any given person might not fit the category they'd been handed, that the discomfort came from the work required to actually look at someone, the real, inconvenient, specific work of paying attention without deciding first. Nathan Whitmore had decided first. He had looked at Lily and seen a category, and the category told him what to do, and the category was wrong, but he trusted it anyway because the category was easier than the actual child in front of him. The welfare officer had come out and looked, actually looked, seen Lily at the tally table with her leather-bound journal and her strong opinions about incomplete records, and gone back to the county and written a report that said there was nothing to see here because he'd bothered to look and found out what was true. Holt had built a table at the right height and never mentioned it. There was a version of this story where the lesson was about Lily, about not underestimating people with disabilities, about the chair not defining the person. That lesson was true, but Amelia had been sitting with a different understanding of it since the spring, and it was this. The limitation was never Lily's. The limitation was always in the people who decided before they looked. Lily had never been limited by her chair. She had been limited in the ways that mattered by other people's failure to pay attention. And the thing about paying attention was that it wasn't a talent. It wasn't a special quality some people had and others didn't. It was a choice, available to anyone willing to make it, costing nothing except the willingness to be wrong about what you expected to find. Holt made the choice. Aldred made the choice. Dot made the choice. Margaret eventually made the choice. Morrison made the choice when he sent his son to learn something instead of arguing about it. Whitmore never made the choice, and it cost him everything he'd been trying to protect. October arrived again, and with it the first anniversary of the afternoon train from Denver, pulling into Silver Creek with Amelia and Lily and 2 worn bags and $23 and a plan that hadn't survived the day. She noticed the date without making a production of it. It was a Thursday, an ordinary working day. She had the accounts to update and 3 windows to recaulk before the cold came back and bread rising on the counter. Nothing about the day asked to be marked, but she found herself in the late afternoon standing at the front porch rail in the same place she'd stood on the March night when Wyatt had told her what was happening and asked her to know it. The mountains were doing their October thing in the west, the aspens on the lower slopes gone to yellow and orange, the peaks behind them still summer gray where they weren't snow-capped, the whole arrangement so consistently beautiful that it bordered on showing off. Lily came out and maneuvered her chair to the rail beside her. Cal says the first snow's coming by the end of next week, Lily said. Cal's usually right about that. He says the cattle are telling him. She looked out at the mountains. Do you think cattle actually know things? I think they notice things, Amelia said. Changes in the air, the light, and I think Cal has been watching them notice for so long that he can read what they're noticing. Lily thought about this. So the cattle know, and Cal knows, because the cattle know. Something like that. That's a long way around, Lily said. Most knowledge is. Lily rested her arms on the rails. She was tall enough now to reach it properly, and looked at the mountains with the same stock-taking expression she'd used on Silver Creek through the train window a year ago. A year of surfaces navigated, paths learned, a barn and a south pasture and a tally book and a dog who was technically not allowed inside. "Mama," she said. "Yes. Are we staying?" Amelia looked at her daughter. The question was genuine, not anxious, not hoping for a specific answer, just the honest inquiry of a child who had learned that honest questions were worth asking. "Yes," Amelia said. "We're staying." Lily nodded slowly. the nod of someone confirming what they'd already more or less concluded. "Okay," she said. They stood there while the October light did its work on the mountains, and the ranch went about its late afternoon business around them. Denny crossing the yard to the barn, James and Holt's voices from somewhere near the south fence, the sound of the kitchen door and Reckless's nails on the porch boards as she came to find them, because she always came to find them. Wyatt came out a few minutes later and stood on Lily's other side, and nobody said anything for a while because nothing in particular needed to be said. This was the thing that didn't get written about in the stories people told about the frontier, about the hardship and the survival and the dramatic moments that made for good telling. Nobody wrote about the ordinary wait of an October afternoon. The animals settling, the mountains going gold, a woman and a man and a child standing on a level porch that used to be dangerous and wasn't anymore. The silence between them, the particular kind that only existed between people who had run out of things to prove to each other. They had come at each other from hard directions. Amelia from a grief she was still negotiating, from a humiliation that had forced her to be braver than she'd planned on being, from a plan that had lasted 4 hours. Wyatt, from 5 years of doing the minimum to keep a life running, while the part of him that knew how to be present with someone had stayed shut, waiting for something he hadn't known he was waiting for. Lily, from the daily fact of a world that had decided things about her before meeting her and had been consistently wrong. None of them were fixed. That was not how people worked. Amelia still reorganized things that didn't need reorganizing. Wyatt still got less granular about the accounts than she thought was wise. Lily still held grudges about incomplete records with a persistence that occasionally crossed into the disproportionate. But they had chosen each other, in the specific, daily way that choosing someone actually happened, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of small decisions. The path cleared after the rain, the coffee kept warm, the right height table built 3 times to get it right, the door opened for the dog on the cold night because rules mattered less than the particular cold night in front of you. The mountains held their light a moment longer than usual, the way they sometimes did in October. The last of the sun catching the aspen line and holding it gold before the ridge cut it off. Reckless put her head under Lily's hand. Lily scratched behind her ears without looking down, with the automatic ease of long familiarity. "Next week's snow," Lily said to no one in particular, "is going to be a problem for the south fence posts." "Already on the list," Wyatt said. "Good," Lily said. The light let go of the mountains. The ranch settled into evening. Inside the kitchen, the bread was probably ready, and there was supper to think about, and tomorrow's accounts, and the fence posts, and all the ordinary forward weight of days that kept arriving and needed meeting. They went inside.